In this episode of Locked On Capitals, your Washington Capitals take down the Nashville Predators by a score of 3-0. Let's talk about that game next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. And when you're on YouTube, make sure and hit that subscribe button. And if you like the videos, give it a thumbs up. It really helps grow the channel. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition, we will talk about the Caps win over the Nashville Predators by a score of 3-0. A really great game, and a game where Darcy Kuemper stood on his head and made some great saves. Then later in the show, we will talk about this depleted Capitals team. We already know that they're missing a bunch of players. Now add two more players to the list in TJ Oshie and John Carlson, both out with lower body injuries. What will that mean for this Capitals team? And then we will talk about the impact of the fourth line once again as Beck Malenstyn gets on the board here. But just to get it going here, one of the things that the Capitals didn't want to have happen in this game ultimately was to face more injuries, because we know already there's quite a few injuries on this team. If we look at Nick Backstrom, we take a look at Tom Wilson, you take a look at Connor Brown. So just a lot of injuries on this list, on this team already. So then you can add TJ Oshie and John Carlson, both with lower body injuries. Not an ideal situation, but that's what the Caps are up against. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the show. But ultimately, the big news is the Caps get a W, and they win by a score of 3-0. And once again, another game that saw great production by the fourth line. Dowd to Malenstyn to start the game 1-0. So good for Beck Malenstyn. He is already paying dividends just based on him being in the lineup. We've seen him show up on the score sheet before, but that fourth line once again is showing up big, and it helped the Caps get on the board early. And then Protas, another pleasant surprise, kind of really lit up the score sheet, or lit up the preseason, and he gets on the board. We'll talk a little bit later how he's ultimately not too happy with his production. And then the big thing too is Ovi keeps chipping away at the goals as he gets an empty netter and makes it 3-0. Alex Ovechkin is 111 goals until the record, and he is currently sits at 784. The projection on him to hit Wayne Gretzky's record is the 24-25 season. And his projected goals, you can take a look at this online, is 36 goals this year. I do think that is a very attainable task for him to get that goal this year. 36 goals. My projection for him is to get 52 goals. I know that the Athletics projection for him was, I want to say 47. So for him to get 52 for me anyway, I don't think that should be any problem. But according to Google, they have a tracker, the Ovechkin goal tracker. His projected goals for this season is 36. So just good to see Ovi continue to keep chipping away at that total. But this was a game, ultimately for me, the big thing about it was the big thing for me on this one, was Darcy Kuemper showing up big. He made 34 saves on 34 shots, so you can't ask anything better from him. There were some high danger shots that he faced, and he overcame those shots. So just good on Darcy for continuing to do what he does best, and that is playing in top form in net there. So we can't ask anything more from him. So this game starting off, was one of the games where, the Caps were under pressure immediately. There was a breakaway, and Darcy Kuemper had to make a big save just to start the game. So I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be another one of those games where they're just going to really throw the kitchen sink at the Capitals. But then all of a sudden, Anthony Mantha made multiple breakaway shots at the net. He didn't ultimately find the back of the net, but Anthony Mantha getting some really great scoring opportunities to start this game. And they were talking about in the game that this is one of the loudest arenas in the NHL, but the Capitals found a way to kind of keep the Nashville Predator fans quiet as they kind of worked over that team. And it wasn't a blowout. I mean, I know if you look at the score sheet, it was 3-0, but you have to take into consideration that that was one of those was an empty netter, and for a good chunk of the game, they were scoreless. So, I wouldn't say that the Nashville Predators played horribly. I just think that, it was actually a pretty even duel throughout the game. It's just the Capitals stood tall and they made the most of their opportunities. The power play working together, the penalty kill, they killed off the last 14. So things are starting to come together a little bit for this team. I don't want to say they're out of the woods and they're going to, continue to win multiple games in a row, but it's just incremental steps, baby steps. And I'm going to take a win of 3-0 any day of the week. I don't care how you have to get there, but 3-0 is a great win. And what it does for me is it continues to prove that Darcy Kuemper is that number one netminder for the Capitals. I don't think there was any question there, but the questions that the Capitals faced was, were they going to be able to get that same production from Darcy Kuemper on the Capitals as, on the Colorado Avalanche? Everyone's saying, well, he played that well because of the defense in front of him for the Avalanche. But you take a look at him, he has played very well throughout this entire season. Not goalies aren't going to be perfect game in and game out, but what we've seen from him so far this year, he has been playing in top form. So the arrow's pointing up for Darcy, and he kept the Capitals in this game, because let's be honest, there were some high danger chances in this game today. And if there was a goalie, that was far less in quality and stature, if you took a look at Samsonov or Vanacek last season, I don't know if they necessarily would have got the win today. So just big on the Capitals, big on Darcy Kuemper for stepping up and playing another big game for the Caps. You look to see Charlie Lindgren probably get a start here soon coming up. Because you're going to want to kind of keep these guys fresh. You don't want to just keep going with Darcy again and again and again. Ultimately split up the workload a little bit, because at the end of the day, that is what he's about. He's not used to carrying the bulk of the mail for any of the teams that he's on. All right, so after the break here, we will talk about those injuries to TJ Oshie and John Carlson and what that means for this team. We'll talk about that next. BetOnline.net is your number one source for betting football and the start of the new basketball season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. And if you guys want to bet on all the games for the Capitals, you could bet on the next game coming up against the Hurricanes. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen today. Now make your second listen at Locked On Game to Game. Every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game across the NHL with a local analysis only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. In this episode, we are talking about the big win by the Washington Capitals over the Nashville Predators by a score of 3-0 on Saturday night. So just a really great positive moment going forward. I know Nashville always kind of gives the Capitals fits. This game was no exception either. There were a lot of high danger chances on both sides. It just happens that the Capitals were victorious in this case, and also that Darcy Kuemper once again stood on his head and made some really great saves. He didn't allow one goal. And that's what I'm talking about. If that doesn't solidify who Darcy is in net for this Caps team, I don't know what does, because there's still people, and I get messages on Twitter from time to time, people saying, they spent too much money and Darcy isn't all that. What I've seen from him so far is he is all that, and he continues to play very well for this Capitals team. And that's what we hope for going forward, is just more production on that. So in this next segment here, we are going to talk about the bad news of this game. Yes, even in a 3-0 win, there is some bad news, and that is John Carlson and TJ Oshie left the game with lower body injuries. And when I was watching the game, I didn't see any apparent hit or anything that triggered me thinking like, they skated off the ice and they're going to play poor. I guess I just noticed that they weren't out on the ice for quite some time. But anyway, this story here in Washington hockey now, they're talking about TJ Oshie and John Carlson. Both stars suffered lower body injuries in the first period and did not return. Head coach Peter Laviolette did not have much to share on their statuses right now. They're both lower body injuries, and we're evaluating them, Laviolette said post-game. And then he went on to say that he praised the guys that stood up, because, as you know, if you're missing two big players, TJ Oshie and John Carlson, two huge players, there's going to have to be other guys that step up. In this case, Dmitry Orlov, he praised the team's effort in the wake of the injuries early on. Dmitry Orlov picked up 26:38 on ice time with Carlson out. Darcy Kuemper held down the fort, and Beck, Malenstyn, Aliaksei Protas, and Alex Ovechkin scored to lead the team to a victory. A lot of additional players were also double shifted. And, a lot of teams under this kind of pressure would have folded and said, this is just too much for us. Not the Capitals. They found a way to bind together and win. We can talk about a bit of inconsistent play for the Caps this season so far, but what we can say about them, about the game on Saturday night, is they really worked together as a unit and played well. You lose two players, one forward, one defenseman. You're really juggling it for the rest of the game. I thought our guys did a terrific job, Laviolette added. We put a lot of minutes on guys, and I thought they responded really well. Oshie skated just 1 minute 51 in the first period and appeared to tweak something while working on an early power play. He went directly to the bench and needed help getting down the tunnel. He has also dealt with a myriad of injuries over the last year. The 35-year-old was limited to just 44 games last season due to upper and lower body ailments. He also underwent a procedure in the offseason and dealt with an upper body injury before the start of the 22-23 regular season. Oshie has 5 points through 9 games so far this year. And all we know about Oshie's offseason procedure was a core injury, which I guess is about as vague as you can possibly get. But, Oshie is one of the guys that is a bit prone to the injury bug. It seems like every year he misses some time based on injury. And part of that is because TJ Oshie also, he always plays bigger than he is. Don't tell him he's not the biggest guy on the ice, because he is going to work just as hard as the biggest guys out there and take on some of the biggest guys out there as well. So we hope that whatever the case is with those guys, that they can make a speedy recovery, because we don't need to be missing them for any substantial time. A few minutes after Oshie's injury, Carlson went down awkwardly in the corner after trying to steal the puck from Zach Sanford, former Cap. We all remember him. He also spent some time with the Blues in the defensive zone. He went into split and got up slowly, but finished his shift. He had one more 7-second shift and then went straight down to the dressing room. Number 74 has 6 points in 9 games to open the year. He tied for second on the team in scoring. Although there's no big update from Laviolette, Carlson was part of the post-game locker room celebration and was on his feet and in high spirits. So let's hope, that, we don't need to be out more players, because we will really test the depth of this team. What does this mean for the Capitals if Oshie and John Carlson miss some substantial time? This is what I talked about in this podcast to start the season. Is this could be an opportunity for someone like a Connor McMichael to get his big opportunity. You never ultimately hope for injury, of course, but for a guy like Connor McMichael, they kind of hope for, a way into the lineup, however that may be, whether it's injury or inconsistent play with the current roster. This would be a great opportunity for Connor McMichael to get inserted into the lineup. Now, as far as John Carlson is concerned, they might do a call up, but they also have Matt Irwin, who they keep in the deep freeze. And he's one of those truly interesting guys that he doesn't need a lot of playing time. You can just insert him into the lineup, and it's pretty much flawless, plug and play, as they say. So I don't know if they would go with Matt Irwin or they would go with a guy down in Hershey that's been playing very well. I guess it remains to be seen. It is a bit too early to say. This is Sunday afternoon as I'm recording this, so a lot can change between now and Monday evening as they take on the Carolina Hurricanes. But as I record this at 3 p.m. Central on Sunday, that is who is missing from the lineup. So I will keep you updated. So subscribe on YouTube or on the podcatchers out there, Apple and Spotify, and I will post updates if we hear any updates between now and the game Monday evening against the Carolina Hurricanes. If John Carlson's good to go, if TJ Oshie, I'll keep you guys updated on that. We are keeping our fingers crossed that we will not be missing the two of them, because like I talked about, we're already dealing, the Capitals that is, with major injuries in the form of Backstrom, Wilson, and Connor Brown. You don't want to add those two players to be missing substantial time, or you will really test the depth of this team. All right, so after the break here, we will talk about Aliaksei Protas and how he kind of just had a breakout training camp, but he feels like he's not truly living up to expectation. We'll talk about that next. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. In this episode, we are talking about your victorious Washington Capitals as they take down the Nashville Predators by a score of 3-0 on Saturday evening. In this final segment here, we will talk about Protas, Aliaksei Protas, and how he knows that he, went into camp and got the attention of a lot of people and played so well that they couldn't send him down to Hershey. I don't think that ultimately in the beginning of the year, the plan for Aliaksei Protas was to be on the big team. I know that he was a guy that's played up on the big team before in limited capacity, but I don't think that, to start the training camp, I don't think that the original plan was for Aliaksei to be on the big team, but he played so well. He came into this camp, he came into the preseason, a man on a mission to be on the team, and he did that. There were some guys that they could have probably gone and picked over him. You could have made the argument that Axel Jonsson-Fjällby or perhaps Brett Leason. I guess maybe not Brett Leason. He didn't really show up on the score sheet a whole lot, but you could make the argument that Connor McMichael is a guy out there that is itching for his opportunity. I know that ultimately, his preferred position is center, but I think that, if you ask Connor McMichael, would you be, okay playing wing if it meant you could play every day? And I understand those conversations don't really take place. I don't think that they ask them what they want to do, but I'm just saying that if you were to ask them, Connor McMichael in this situation, I think that he would probably say, well, of course, whatever I got to do. I think he would do anything short of strapping on the goalie pads to get some game action. And so I guess what I'm talking about here is, we hope that, despite all these injuries that, maybe this is an opportunity for someone like a Connor McMichael, but Aliaksei Protas really stood out in the preseason. And he talks here in this story in Washington Hockey Now, how he feels like he's kind of slipped a little bit. I know that he scored a goal here. But ultimately, he is not too pleased with his production so far. Over the last few games, Aliaksei Protas has put himself back on the radar for the Washington Capitals, and while he feels he's building on his game and adapting well to the NHL, he's not entirely satisfied with how the season has started for him. After making noise in the preseason and cracking the Capitals roster, Protas saw things slow down a bit in the start of the season. He went the first 6 games without points before getting on the score sheet on Monday. Since then, he has put up 3 points, 2 goals, 1 assist in his last 3 games. So, for Alexei, I know he set the bar high for himself. And what I would tell Alexei is you're doing a good job. Just be patient. I don't think that there's any real risk of him getting sent down to Hershey. I think that, he's showing up on the score sheet and it's not going to happen always right away. We're starting to see the production. So as long as he can continue with that trajectory, I think he will be okay. I get more confident for sure, but the last couple games, I'm not happy, Protas said after scoring in Saturday's win over the Predators. I got to earn the coach's trust every shift. I can't take a shift off. Couple games weren't the best, so we got to keep getting better. And, that's the hope for the entire Capitals roster is to get better, because as they stands right now, it's a bit lackluster. I know that this last game here, they kind of really, clamped things down and played a game very well, but ultimately they need to do that going forward. It's not enough to get, a good, solid win, here and there. You have to do that consistently. There are a few areas where the 21-year-old stressed the need for improvement. His physicality, when the 6'6" forward utilizes his frame and wingspan, he can win pucks and be hard to get past as well. And that was the scoring of Protas in the game against the Predators, where he was net front, and his huge wingspan made it impossible for Saros to stop the goal. And, that's what I'm talking about. His big size, he used it to his advantage. And that's part of the reason why he's playing on this team right now, is because of that big frame. Capitals like those big guys out on the ice. You take a look at Beck, Malenstyn, you take a look at Aliaksei Protas, you take a look at Anthony Mantha. Those are the big guys that you're not going to be able to move around very easily. Protas is currently skating on the third line wing alongside Mantha and Lars Eller, and he finds himself moving around with TJ Oshie, now injured again, though it's unclear if he'll be out long-term, along with Nick Backstrom, Tom Wilson, Carl Hagelin, Connor Brown, and potentially John Carlson. The Belarus native has shown his versatile player, and he can fit anywhere. And he also knows what it takes to make an impact at the NHL level. And he knows that because he fought to get on this team. Like I talked about in the beginning of the segment here, I don't believe that he was slated to be on the big team this year. I think that he was going to play preseason, I think, and then ultimately get sent down just like the other long list of players. But he played so well that it made it hard for them. It made it impossible for them to send him down to Hershey. I describe myself like a player who can play everywhere. The coach wants me to play on the wing. I'll play on the wing. Center, Protas said, if I will need to help the team on the PK, I'll do that. Like on the power play, it doesn't matter for me. I'll do whatever the coaches tell me to do. It doesn't matter for me where I'll play anywhere. Again, and that was the anecdote that I was talking about Connor McMichael. These young players aren't hung up on the fact that they're not playing in the position that they want to play. They'll play wherever you want. Just put me in, coach. I want to play. And I guess to a certain extent, sometimes you run into that with some more of the older veteran players, where I think that ultimately they will play wherever you want as well. I just think they might grumble and make a little bit more noise about it. Do you know who I am and what positions I've played throughout my career? You don't get that baggage with a young player as much. So good for Aliaksei Protas. And, hopefully, like I said, I hope that, of course, that TJ Oshie is not out for an extended period of time. I hope the same for John Carlson. But it does present an opportunity for a depth player that played in the preseason that got sent down. Could this be an opportunity for a guy like a Sonny Milano? Or is this going to be an opportunity for a Connor McMichael? All signs kind of tend to point to the fact that Sonny Milano is just kind of waiting for his opportunity to get inserted into this lineup. Kind of a depth player, a guy that was drafted high and kind of, they got him on the cheap. I want to say $775,000. So a really good find for the Capitals. And, again, he's probably going to get inserted here at some point. Say Oshie or someone else misses some substantial amount of time, you're going to see a Sonny Milano or a Connor McMichael or a Joe Snively in there as well. But just to kind of, broaden the lens here a little bit about Connor McMichael and Joe Snively, which I've spoke of in this podcast, they need to get playing time or they should get sent down to Hershey. You got to put aside your ego. You got to set aside anything else and just say, for the development of the player, they would be best served in Hershey if they're not going to play on the big team, because, you're getting real world reps in Hershey where you're not getting those up on the big team. You're going to get the pregame skates. You're going to get the practices, at MedStar Ice Complex, but that is not the same as the real world experience on the ice with other NHL players and big NHL teams. So it was a bit of a curious move in the first place to have Connor McMichael on this team. Anyway, I'm not entirely sure why they did that. If they kind of knew they weren't going to have a spot for him, you think that they would almost have signed some snarled old veteran that, I hate to use that term, but, someone like Matt Irwin that understands their role on the team. They understand that they're not going to play all the time, and they're okay with that. But those are generally players that have been in the league for some time, and they've kind of just settled, and they understand that that is their role on the team. Connor McMichael is not that player. He is a top tier center for the Washington Capitals, who they have very high hopes for, and nothing will stunt or stymie his growth than spending the lion's share of the season up in the press box. Same thing could be said for Joe Snively. So I think that ultimately Sonny Milano fits that bill a little bit more for me. He is a bit more of that grizzled veteran who kind of understands his role. Listen, he was on a PTO and got released, so he kind of understands. He can see the football field in front of him. He knows where he sits in the NHL, right? So I think for a guy like Sonny Milano, he would be a better fit on this big team, if we're looking for one of those depth players. I know that Connor McMichael, I don't know if they're kind of worried about his feelings or what the case is, but I think that ultimately there's not a spot for him on this team right now. Some people would say he would be better suited than Lars Eller. Okay, and I hear that argument as well, because we all know that Lars Eller kind of had one foot out the door. Everyone dismissed him as playing his last season on the Capitals, and then guess what happened? We found out that Nick Backstrom had that hip resurfacing procedure, and that really kind of breathed new life into Lars Eller's career on the Washington Capitals. That being said, if we want to start taking a look at stats and that kind of thing, and you want to take a look at Peter Laviolette and, historically how he makes his decisions, generally speaking, he goes for the veteran over the rookie. They're a proven commodity. You know what you have on the ice, game in and game out. A guy like Connor McMichael is a bit of a wild card. You know how he's played in juniors. You know how he's played, in college and Hershey and wherever he's played before. But we don't have a large sample size of him on the big team, at the beginning of last season, he kind of jumped off on the page and he made a big impact, but then that waned. Same thing with Hendrix Lapierre. So I think for me, what the Capitals should do, I think that Sonny Milano would be a better option, because he is settled into the fact he understands what role he has in the NHL. His days of being a top player on an NHL team are probably behind him, but there is also the opportunity that he could be a really great player. If we want to take a look back on Conley, when he played on this team, they picked him up as just kind of a prove me deal. And if you remember his season on the Capitals, where, I want to say it was his first season on the Capitals, he played lights out. And everyone was like, where did they find this diamond in the rough? So I'm not dismissing Sonny Milano as being a nothing. I would love nothing more for him to be one of the future stars of the Capitals, but I'm just saying, based on the information and what I see in front of me, I think that Sonny Milano is going to be a guy that would be better served is to be that healthy scratch. A guy that is going to be, if there is an injury, insert him into the lineup. What I don't want to see, and it seems an issue that Peter Laviolette is skirting a little bit. They asked him about it. What is the long-term plan for Connor McMichael? Is there a plan to send him down to Hershey? He said there is no plan to send him down to Hershey, and I don't think that he would let the press in on that anyway. He would tell the player before he would tell the press. I understand it's the press's job to ask these questions. That's what they get paid for. But for me, that's what I would do right now. Sonny Milano on the big team if Oshie misses some time. And then you could put Connor McMichael back down to Hershey. That just seems like such a no-brainer for me, unless, for example, there's more injuries and there seems to be an obvious place where Connor McMichael could fit in, but there's not a lot of center positions on the team. Who are you going to take out? Are you going to take out Strome? Are you going to take out Kuznetsov? Are you going to take out Lars Eller? Who are you going to take out of this lineup to insert him in? That's the hard reality for Connor McMichael, is that there's no real spot for him right now. This is a team that's coming up against a rebuild at some point, and if they take a nosedive into the concrete, it might come sooner than we think. everything that I've heard from all the beat writers and went talking to and reading up on stuff online and wherever, doing my research on these shows, is that there was certain promises made to Alex Ovechkin that he will play on a competitive team. So for me, from what the data that I've gathered and the things that I've had conversations with different people in the Capitals organization, is that there's not going to be a major rebuild until after Ovechkin. Again, a lot of that could change if this team does nosedive. But what I'm saying right now is that these players, I'm tying this all back into Connor McMichael, is that those guys have to be patient. Their opportunity might not come for a couple of years. But unless they want to leave for quote unquote greener pastures and get playing time on another team, they're going to have to be patient and, get their reps down in Hershey if that's what's called upon. The young players that get integrated into this team, that pace is very slow. Martin Faravari is the first player in quite some time that has actually worked up from Hershey into the Washington Capitals and has maintained a spot on this team. So for someone like Connor McMichael to find that spot, I'm just not sure it's for him right now. But, my big takeaway from this game is we're hoping for nothing but the best for John Carlson and TJ Oshie. And let's just be happy the Capitals got a big win, a 3-0 win over the Nashville Predators. It's a pretty good feeling. It's a good feeling in the regard that Darcy Kuemper is as advertised, like I kind of always knew. And let's hope that he can avoid the injury bug, because we do know that he has had a lengthy stint on the injured list as well. So hopefully he can stay healthy. And if not, we do have a viable option in the form of Charlie Lindgren. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen. For your next listen, checked out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.